All right, we're ready. Okay. All right, guys. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Mike Drop Sports. I'm Jason Jacobs, your host, and today we're going to have a new show on our channel, and it's going to be called Inside View, where we're going to try to interview some sports media personalities, athletes, if possible, things of that nature, to give you guys a little bit more in-depth view into who they are and um, what they're all about. And today is a special episode for me, and we're going to have somebody that's the host of the Locked On Steelers podcast, and also contributes there on Wpxi. You'll probably see him there with covering some sports there. His name is Chris Carter, and thank you, Chris. Welcome, Chris, to the channel, and I appreciate you for being here.
Appreciate you for having me, Jason.
Hey, anytime. Thank you. I really appreciate you coming. And we're just going to dive right in, keep things quick and short. And Chris, just tell us a little bit about you. And I know you grew up in the Homewood area, Alderdice High School, so you're a local guy to the Pittsburgh area. So could you tell us just a little bit about what got you into this path of sports journalism and even the Locked On Steelers podcast and things like that?
Growing up, when you grow up in Pittsburgh, you're going to know a little something about football, especially in my family. My dad coached at Peabody High School, so growing up, I was always kind of like the ball boy or the water boy, or just do whatever I could to be around the team. I idolized a lot of his players. I loved watching those teams, and I grew a love for football at a young age. I'd watch them. I'd watch the Steelers. I'd watch Pitt. I'd watch anything. I was very, very football forward in our family. My dad played it in high school. My uncle played it in college. And my grandpa was actually on the last Shenley team of the 1900s to win a city league championship. That was like in the 30s. So like they went for like 70 years without winning a title or something like that.
Amazing.
So, just stuff like that. You grew up loving football. And then I wasn't heading into sports journalism as a career for a while. I did political science in undergrad. I did law school. But when I was in law school, I was looking for extra ways to make money that weren't too much extra manual labor, because I already studied a lot of hours and did a lot of other stuff. I found the website Behind the Steel Curtain, where I was just like, I could just write about the Steelers and make a little bit of money on the side. That sounds cool. So I already wrote a whole lot, because it was just law school and just political, it was just in my natural blood. I had to adjust nature. Right. It was just I can write now. I had to adjust my form a lot, but so I just started doing that when I was in law school, kept with it. For a while, it was just going to be like the extra thing I did on the side for fun, is just a blog thing. But then I started making real money with it, and then I started getting more opportunities. And then with that came, I was like, well, this is actually proving to be pretty supportive of trying to build my life forward. So I was like, let me put more effort into this. And now here I am. I work for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I do Locked On Steelers. I work Channel 11, and I wear a bunch of different hats whenever someone calls upon me.
Nice. And how is that so much different for you in the sports media realm here, dealing with going from TV to podcasting? How do those things differ, in terms of how you prepare and, just what you're doing? Is it just a ton different? I mean, is there a big difference?
I mean, in ways, there's ways you prepare differently, but I work to write the way that I talk, because I want you, when you're reading something, I want you to hear my voice. I want you to hear, I don't want you to be reading something and thinking like, oh, well, this is just something I'm getting out of a textbook. I want you to hear like, oh no, this is like Chris talking to me right now through this article. And I feel like I do a good job at that. I have people tell me that they enjoy my work because of that. I hope that continues to be, I hope that is a thing for a lot of people who read my work and can continue to be that moving forward. But I've gotten really good. I feel like I've gotten really good at all the different platforms. And I think that, if anyone's listening out there that wants to venture into this, that is a huge key for getting into media and being successful. If I, put my feet in the ground and said, well, I'm only going to write, I'd have missed out on so many podcast opportunities that people could have heard me on, or would have missed out on so many radio opportunities that people could have heard me on, or so many TV opportunities. And now when people see me, it's like, hey man, I just saw you on Channel 11, or hey man, I just heard you on 93.7, or hey man, I watch your podcast all the time, or hey man, I read you on this website or this newspaper or this thing or this over here. And when you have that, it kind of allows you, if you work hard and you develop a good foundation, that you could just know what you're talking about in general, you're going to have a wider range of people who understand you and understand your brand, and then want to be part of that and want to learn from it. So, yeah, so I think that's the biggest. That's one of the biggest things. Is there are different things you have to do to prepare. Like video wise, I had to learn how to how to kind of carry myself on camera a little bit more, being present of how you look, and not to just like scratch your head all the time or do stuff that you can get away with on radio. But with writing, there's different things you got to look out for. The sort of I always like to throw in different flavors of things, or different, like go on different tangents when I talk, as you'll probably see in this interview. But in doing those tangents, you can't do that as much in writing, because you're trying to be concise and you're trying to get this point out. So it's different things, but all in all, the biggest thing I think is find your voice, develop your voice, and look at how to enhance it as a better message to your viewers, listeners, or readers.
Well, I know you're very creative. My son, actually, he's 14 years old. He enjoys your Stars and Skulls.
Yes, sir.
Right? I watch it too. I just the older I get, I don't remember the little words.
Oh, sometimes. That's fine.
But no, he loves that. So that's very creative on your end. So that's showing, everybody out there how you have to be creative and how you have to find ways to interact with your community. And I think, as for me going forward, that's another thing. Like you said, find your voice and not go off on the tyrants. Just off on anything. I know you said that you work for the PG. You're covering Pitt football, correct? I think that's all you cover there is Pitt football.
All things Pitt. I cover Pitt basketball too.
Okay, Pitt basketball. Well, all things Pitt. I wanted to ask you, and I thought it was a big thing in my head while I'm thinking about it now. The NIL deals, how does that make covering college sports any different for you now than it has in the past? Has that changed anything?
I mean, it's not like it's too like they're still covering the games. It does add an extra layer of things you need to pay attention to, because before it was like, if money was involved, it was illegal. Now it's like, oh, there's money involved, and it's just kind of a regular thing. It's added an extra layer of complication of an investigation on our part, but still it's just about teams playing their best, programs building, and how they do it. Certainly though, there's lots of factors there that we didn't have to consider a few years ago, that now is basically a wild west of figuring out how it works and how to talk about how it works.
And that's where I was wondering, with sponsorship deals and things like that limit like your access to these athletes, just because they have certain sponsorship deals, they have to do certain things. That's where I was kind of going with that. Just it seems like it would be a sticky situation for sure now that a lot of money's involved. So that's big. And when working with Pitt football and Pitt athletics and all things Pitt, or is it a lot different working with Pitt as opposed to like the Steelers pro teams? How does that differ in terms of how you cover those teams?
I mean, yeah, just because of the nature of what you're doing, when you're talking to, I give more grace to college student athletes, because of their youth and the situation that they're in. I think that when a college player says something, I think there's an acknowledgement that, like, hey, like that guy's like 20 years old. Like, let's not, unless it's something that's like very dangerous or something very, gruesome. If it's just like a simple slip up in the way they said a sentence that's like they could have said it and made it smarter, like those are things that you kind of overlook, or you're more forgiving for college students. I think for pro athletes, it's like, hey, like, you should know how to handle yourself by now. I think there's things like that to come into play, but it's also just how you talk to them. Like, I won't, like, a lot of people will scoop pro athletes on their big announcements on things. The last thing that I want to do is scoop a college kid's day. Like, if they're going to, they're going to pick this school, let that kid have that moment, man. Like, this is exactly, I ain't about that kind of a life. If that's what's going to make me money as a journalist, I don't think I want to do that.
Right. Exactly.
But I think finding ways to tell stories about how they came to that decision, and kind of working with the student there, I think that's cool. That's better. That's a better way of telling the story, but also not trying to make yourself the story. Because when I do my work, I try to make it so that it's not about me. It's about the people that I'm covering and the things that I'm covering and the work that's in front of me. That's why, like, there's sometimes I'll throw, like, if there's an interjection between myself and the person that I'm talking about or writing about or whatever, I'll throw that in there on occasion, but like by and large, I keep the focus about what I think about these people. So
Right.
that, and I think in the pros, there's a little bit more room to kind of be like, you don't need to be, you could kind of take the gloves off a little bit, but especially in college, I think that's one thing. But there's also just different dynamics with how to approach things. In college, I'm given more free reign at Pitt. The SIDs there. I deal with EJ Borghetti and Matt Plizza all the time, and they're great. And they both, give me different kinds of access than I get with the Steelers. But also it's different because they're working in a different way to promote a program. That's where the Steelers are a PR department, and they have to manage things different ways, and there's rules that they have to adhere to. Right. So there are differences. Yeah.
And then in the NFL, there are just limited times that you have access to them. And that's the same with Pitt. You're saying like different access. So there's only certain media availability times, correct? So you can only be in there certain times with the Steelers. And then Pitt, you're saying, allows you a little bit more freedom to get extra stories, I guess, is what you're saying.
But just like, I think it's just how they go about it. Like, Pitt is gonna, I think it's just like how they reach out about it. Sometimes like with Pitt, you can get to something that you'll hear about something a little bit faster. I think sometimes the Steelers, they're also the top dogs in Pittsburgh. Like there's they don't have to work to get press coverage. They say something, people will be there. And I think Pitt, they're very mindful of like, hey, like even when they're really good, it's like, hey, we want everyone who can to be here for that. And I think that there's a little difference in that, but the Steelers, they also have to, consider a lot more. Yeah. I think that there's a lot of things to cover there. So yeah, just,
a lot more money.
I think, a lot more money too, but I think there's minutia things, but if you're a good reporter, you wade past that and you find the strengths in each situation.
Right. Pitt was always very generous. I had a cousin that was a starting lineman there. I think he was a guard that started at Pitt, Jeff Craig, years ago, back in the days of actually Connellsville High School being good, when winning the WPIL championship game and all those things. So he came out of Connellsville, but they always allowed children like myself to have access to the locker room, to be real family oriented. So I don't know if they're still like that now. That was years ago, but they were a really good group with that, remaining family oriented and things. And bringing me into that, I don't know, did you cover Damar Hamlin there, or was that something you didn't cover? Oh, okay.
No, I did cover Damar.
Yeah, and was that something though that really affected you now, though, that you've seen and gained a personal relationship with someone like that, and then see something tragic like that happen?
I mean, yeah, it's not like Damar and I were like friends or anything like that. Like, it was more like, acquaintances. He was a college athlete and I was a reporter who reported on him. That kind of happens. But anytime you see someone, and I think the biggest thing is that, I've met hundreds of athletes now and that I've covered and talked to and gotten to know a little bit. And Damar Hamlin is one of the nicest ones up there. And I think it's, when I saw him initially go down, I was sitting there with my old man watching the game. And I was like, oh no, not Damar. And I thought it was a head injury. And then they said he was doing CPR. And then I was like, what? And I was like, well, this is not only am I personally concerned, but he's a Pitt guy. I have to report this. So I immediately took to Twitter to figure out which reporters were on the scene to get their information, and then try to put it into an article at the Post-Gazette, just so we could have something initial there to say like, hey, this is what's happening on site. So,
and as a reporter, and as, like you said, knowing him as an acquaintance or whatever, that kind of puts you, in my mind, just in a weird place, and what to say and what not to say, especially in today's world. You have to really be conscious of what you're saying, so that was just really tough. And wow, God bless you, man. It was hard for me to sit there with my 14-year-old son and explain what was going on to him, of why they're beating on someone's chest. So that was it was very, very, very tough situation. Moving on, and how did you get into this Locked On Steelers podcast thing? How did that all come about for you?
It was honestly, I think just a stroke of goodwill between good people. But back in, what was it, 2018, Steelers training camp. I'm there. It's my second full training camp that I've been able to go to, and I'm just kind of, I've gotten a little bit more used to things, so I'm feeling more comfortable. And I see a guy walking around who, like, he's part of the media, but like he's obviously not like no one's talking to him. So I'm like, well, let me introduce myself just to get to know this guy. Turned out it was Tony Serino, who was the host of the Locked On Steelers podcast at the time.
Right.
And I was like, cool, that's nice. And I was like, hey man, well, if you ever have a show and you want to guest, let me know. I like to do stuff. And so it turned out originally it was just like a once a month he'd bring me on, and he'd do really good numbers, and Tony did a great job. He's hilarious, he's funny. That's why in fact I'm having him on my Wednesday episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast.
I see that
tomorrow. But so eventually over time we did like over that 2018 season we just did like once a month we do a show together, and then it was like early 2019 when he was like, hey, so I need someone else to bounce ideas off of consistently. Would you be a co-host? And I was like, heck yeah, I'd be a co-host. So we became co-hosts in like early 2019. And then from there, we just ripped and ran. He came to the 2019 training camp, and we kind of did shows. I remember we used to do shows in his car. That was crazy.
It was live from training camp. I think I remember some of those.
Live from training camp back when he was like, Devlin Hodges is going to be the next GOAT. All those.
He was on the table, I think, for Devlin. I think he really liked him.
Yeah. Huh? I mean, it was like the second day of training camp. He said, "That's my guy." And then, I was like, Tony, he's going to get cut. And then he did. And then he came back. And then, of course, Devlin Hodges, that whole year happened. But yeah, Tony was he was great through all of it. But Tony, he also he's great in IT. He does a lot of stuff with computers that I can't even fathom. And so when he got more opportunities there, he's like, hey, I kind of have to drop this. You can run this by yourself. And I was like, okay. So I had a lot of fun just kind of being the color guy that kind of worked with Tony Serino, and we kind of developed a comedic duo type of thing. So it was sad that I got to break up with him, but it was cool that I got to kind of have my own show to just put my own fingerprints on and control. And I still bring on Tony all the time. Anytime that he's free, he still does other things. He has the AFC North Talk podcast now, but it's been a really cool thing. And Locked On Steelers has brought so much to my life, is just as far as the opportunity that it gave to have a voice and to develop a brand. And it's really cool. I'm walking with Brooke Pryor, who's the ESPN Steelers reporter, and we're walking through training camp, and at one point we get stopped by a bunch of different people, and I'm saying hi to all these people, like, oh, you're Chris Carter, and after a while Brooke's like, Chris, you're getting more recognized than I am. I work on ESPN. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, you're bigger than you think. And I try not to get too big at times, but it's kind of cool when
enjoy it. Enjoy it. Hey, my 14-year-old son was one of those people yelling for you, slapping me on the arm, going, "Hey, Dad, that's Chris."
Well, I apologize if I didn't get to him. I hope I get
to him. Hey, it was a big group. No, you were fine. Definitely, you were walking with a group, and you guys were going down toward where the tight ends usually hang out and start at the beginning of practice there. So he was screaming, but it was awesome.
That's really cool
thing. Yeah, no doubt. And speaking of the Steelers, what do you think about the Steelers this year? What do you think about their just year as a whole? What do you think? What's your thoughts?
I thought that if you had told me that TJ Watt would miss 2 months of action,
exactly,
I would have thought this would have been Mike Tomlin's first losing season. I would have thought that they would have crumbled, that there was just too much weight on the team without him playing to be able to make things happen. And especially if you would have told me that the offensive line started the way it did, that Mitch Trubisky got benched for Kenny Pickett, and then Kenny Pickett's first few games, he threw a bunch of interceptions. If you told me all of that, I'd been like, there's no way.
Right.
But to see them rally the way they did, and there was a lot of parts throughout every week, I was like, are they going to be able to pull this off? Because so many times Mike Tomlin has had those years where things just didn't work out to start, and then they figure things out and they push hard late in the year. And I was wondering if that would come again. And the fact that it did again, I think just shows that there's still something there amongst this team that's saying, hey, when all the stars align, when the players are developed at the right times, this team is going to be able to go back and compete and be a real playoff and even Super Bowl contender, I think, in the coming years. So, this year, it would have been nice if they had made the playoffs, sure. And there were certainly moments where they fell short, especially early in the season, that, are pretty much like, dang, that was really rough. But in a year where you have a rookie quarterback, when you didn't have an offensive identity coming into the year, when you were missing your best defensive player, the best defensive player in the NFL for 2 months of the season, I think all of those things are very reasonable. I think next year will be a year to see, can they kind of started to find that offensive identity. Can they further mold that next year? Can they be a more proficient offense? And can the defense add the right pieces this offseason to be a more complete defense and actually finish? They finished top 10 in scoring. Now I think that if they make the right investments and moves this offseason, I think that they need to get back to being top 5.
Right. And I agree with a lot of things that you said there, especially where you were saying, the young quarterback. I think a lot of it's going to have to do with Kenny Pickett. Does he take that next step? In which I've seen he has that it factor, in my opinion. But I think inside linebacker, things like that, if they just make a few tweaks, I think that you're, right on there, and that they could really make a push next year, which I'm hoping for. Anyway, we'll see.
That'd be really cool to cover.
Yeah, no doubt. And do you think they're going to keep Devin Bush? That was the question I wanted to ask you for sure too, while we're on the Steelers. I don't think so.
I have a hard time seeing it happen. The only way I could see it happening is if like he hits free agency, nobody gives him any money, and then it's like you can come back for like $2 million, like
a Terrell Edmonds situation,
very much a Terrell Edmonds type of situation. But I really got the sense that Devin Bush didn't want to be there anymore. Just things hadn't worked out. He only played 5% of the snaps, like in the last 3 games or so. That's not where he wants to be, and it's not like he was losing out to Fred Warner or anything. It was Miles Jack, Robert Spillane, and Mark Robinson. So I think they're moving on. I think the Steelers, they have I think they have a plan at off-ball linebacker that they want to. They know they have the superstar safety. I think they want to add maybe another piece at corner. Granted, I think they also know they have good veterans there, but I think they want to add another piece along with Miles Jack to make the linebacker group really solid. Because if they are, and they get that extra piece on the D line that pairs with Cam Hayward, either that's keeping Ogunjobi or adding another guy, I think that completes this defense as a whole unit and can make them a really tough group in 2023.
Yeah, especially TJ Watt if he stays healthy. Highsmith really took a big leap, in my opinion. I thought he played lights out most of the season. But then again, too, when you're playing across from TJ Watt, that's kind of easy. But he was out for 2 months. So,
yeah.
But yeah, the offense, I think, has the potential to make some big steps, too. So, moving off the Steelers here. What do you think about the NFL championship weekend? What do you think? Who's going to win? Who's going to be the losers? Who's moving on? Who's not?
Looking at this, I find it hard to pick against the Bengals right now. They're playing really well.
I do too.
I felt like if their struggles against Baltimore carried over, that the Bills were going to take them, but the Bills were just too sloppy in that game. To take advantage of any of those weaknesses. I think the Bengals defense is playing very well right now, and I just think that if Patrick Mahomes was healthy, I'd still be looking at the Bengals as slim favorites. Now I consider them more like a full touchdown favorite in my book. So I'm picking the Bengals. If the Chiefs win, I think it would be a real big testament to Patrick Mahomes and his greatness and what he's able to do, because also you look at the Bengals, they have a wider array of just weapons for Joe Burrow to go to, and their defense has been playing people always talk about the Steelers have you have $100 million defense and who also has $100 million defense? The Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah, the Cincinnati.
And that's the group I think that carried them last year through the playoffs, and I think is doing a lot of the heavy lifting right now too. So,
and when they gained Mike Hilton from the Steelers in free agency, I thought that was a big move. I don't know about anybody else, but I thought that was a heavy hit, not only for the Steelers, but a huge upgrade for the Bengals, because now they have that versatile player that could really make some noise. So that was really big. Yeah, for sure. And the NFC side, do you like Jalen Hurts, or do you think the Niners are a little too tough?
Man, I am torn. I love Jalen Hurts. I love Jalen Hurts in college. When he stuck around for an extra year at Alabama after getting benched in the national championship game and didn't complain one bit. And then when Tua got hurt in the SEC championship, and then he goes in and Hurts leads them to that win, I was like, man, I root for that guy so hard. And then when he went to Oklahoma, I was rooting for him so bad to pull off an amazing upset over them. So I love Jalen Hurts. I think that he is a fantastic player. I think that he's, there are certain limitations to his game, but I think that he's not Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow. Like that's a class of quarterback that I think is of its own type of thing. But I think there are more teams starting to realize you don't need a top 3 quarterback to be one of the best teams in the NFL. It really helps.
No.
It makes things a lot better if you do. But the Niners and the Eagles are two shining examples, I think, of a lot of the type of teams that are going to be coming forward in the next few years in the NFL.
Right.
Teams that aren't happy-go-lucky, but they punch you in the mouth, they take the ball away, and they know how to counter what you like to do with your quarterback. So I think that both of those are fantastic teams. Right now, I'm picking the Eagles because they looked. I thought the Eagles were going to come out of the bye and be, stutter stepping a little bit, kind of finding their feet. They did nothing of the such. They just whomped on the New York Giants. I think the Niners, they have Brock Purdy. This has been a Cinderella ride for him, but it's been carried. He's played very well, but he's been carried by a great defense, a great offensive line, a great running back. I think that they have a lot of things going for them, but I think the Eagles edge them out because the Eagles have a lot of those things. And they have Jalen Hurts over Brock Purdy. So I'm going to go with the Eagles. And I think it's going to be Eagles-Bengals in the Super Bowl. And I think that's going to be very interesting because the Eagles have a defensive front that does not mess around.
No.
And if the Bengals offensive line isn't healed in 3 weeks when that game is supposedly happens, I think it could be a very interesting matchup to see how Joe Burrow counters that group and then how the Eagles defense tries to contain Jalen Hurts in that offense. But either way, I think we're in for a really fun Sunday when all the teams clash.
Yeah, me too. I think it's going to be really exciting, and that's just part of the NFL. I mean, it's just such a machine. Every game is good. Every game usually is close. So I'm waiting for teams, like you said, Jalen Hurts is limited. I'm waiting for teams to catch on to the vibe of, hey, let's ride with this kid while he's on his rookie contract, and then just let him go and try to roll the dice and find somebody else. I mean, instead of paying $40-50 million for these guys, I think it's just a little outrageous at times, for how much of the salary cap that they eat up. So I'm just waiting for a team to really get on that train. So, but anyway, Chris, we'll start wrapping things up. I kept you a little later than I wanted to. I didn't want to keep you all day. But anyway, tell us a little bit about things you do outside of the sports media community. Any type of volunteer work or anything like that?
These days, not as much. It's kind of rough on you. But when I do have time, I like I said, all the hats I wear. But when I do have time, I serve on the board of directors for the Community Empowerment Association.
Okay,
it's a group in Homewood that works to better the community and the neighborhood around us. We work with kids every year. I try to get ever since the training camp opened up after COVID. But I work to try to get some of those kids to Steelers training camp to get them that experience. I did the same for the Kingsley Association, where I'm also now on the board of directors with them as well. So I try to use whatever I can to kind of promote different groups there. My father works with Mad Dads, and when I had time, I would work with them. But right now it's just more so I work so much as far as I do. During a football season, I do 6 shows for Locked On, 3 shows a week for Wpxi, 4 shows a week for the Post Gazette. So on average, I'm doing like 13 shows, and that's just what I'm usually working with there. That's usually just like the things that I'm scheduled to do. Right. That doesn't include like other radio interviews and things that I do on top of that. So, when you're doing all that and you're writing articles and you're going to availabilities and you're attending games and you're doing it adds up really quickly.
Especially juggling all that personal life, family life, all that. Yeah, definitely. And moving forward in 2023, what big things does the podcast have going on, the Locked On podcast, or any other big things that you have maybe going on in social media world?
We're going to be keeping it going strong. I'm looking to find different ways to expand Locked On Steelers in 2023. Still some things in the works. When those things happen, we'll probably talk about it then. But just planning stages now that the season's over, it gives me a little bit of time to step back and rethink what things would I like to do better next year, and what things can I afford to do better next year, because there's also, again, the time constraints and, there's things like that. But, I think I've been learning a lot as a writer at the Post Gazette. It's allowed me to get more access and access not just to people for sources, but also access to people for insight and to help me, build my skill as a writer and as a journalist. So, just building that way, staying strong. I'm hoping that this time next year, I'm still with all my assignments and all the things that I do. And I'm just a sharper person next year. And that's what I try to work on every day.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. And I just want to let you know, I think the work you do is fabulous. My kids love it. So, hey, you're reaching that younger generation too. And like I said, everything you do, I love. It's pretty good. And everybody else, I hope they tune in to watch you and subscribe to the Locked On channel. But we'll wrap things up here. And I appreciate you coming on. And thank you again. And maybe one day we'll sit down and talk again. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Chris.